start with a story this morning. There was a man in his younger years, saw the advent, if you will, and the subsequent beautiful generations of the Chevrolet Corvette. Not being a rich man, he saved and he saved and he saved and he saved and he saved his money until he could afford such model year that he wanted. And he was absolutely ecstatic. He drove that at every opportunity. Took very meticulous care of it. And when the time came that he knew his life was not much longer, he sought to be buried in his car. Now by this time, through some diligent saving, careful investments, he had amassed a great deal of money. So, in Kentucky, Bowling Green, I believe, is where the Corvette comes out of, he was buried in a gigantic vault with his car. It was specially prepared, drained of all fluids, all the toxic stuff removed, so that he, according to him, could spend an eternity with his car. Now, there are some people that I know, gearheads, that say, man, that is really cool. I think, what a waste of a car. He who dies with the most toys still dies. Can't take it with you. Another quick story. Man grew up dirt poor. Through a lot of diligence and hard work, and some would say the Lord's blessing, he amassed a fortune. A fortune. Now, his wife had, over the years, he had allowed her to do her thing, and she had amassed some wealth herself. Nowhere near his amount of wealth. And he says, when I die, he says, I want you to make a withdrawal from the bank and I want to be buried with it. He says, I am taking it with me. And she says, okay, that's fine. You know, you've earned it. So they were had the service there at the graveside, and everybody's waiting for the wife to show up. And she wasn't there, and she wasn't there. And by this time, the service was over, and everyone was gone, and they're waiting to lower him in because they're waiting to put all his money in there. So finally she came, and she had a shoebox, and it was fancily decorated, and she placed the shoebox, and she wept for him, and she kissed him, and they closed the casket and sealed it all up and lowered him down, and filled in the casket. And somebody said, I just cannot believe your dedication to your husband and burying him with all his money. She says, no, I didn't do that. She says, I had all of his money transferred to my account, and I wrote him a check. You still can't take it with you. That doesn't have much bearing on what we're talking about today, except for the human side of us, or the things that we do. Some of them you could say the dumb things that we do. In Isaiah 45, chapter 45, verse 22, he says, turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God, and what? There is no other. Now, even if we had a new and revised Bible that came out, let's say, January 1st, it wouldn't say, and there is also Buddha, and there is Muhammad, and there is whoever else, take your pick, Mork from Ork. It would still say, and there is no other. So, I wonder how many of us expect God to come to us with his blessing and just whoop, with a magic wand, you know, get the little thing sound like on the Disney movies, and ta-da, we're blessed. Or saved. We know the story of Peter. Now Jesus had just fed the 5,000. Well, 5,000 men. In those times they counted men. The women and children were separate. He had been working miracles. It was very late in the day. he said, the disciples came to him and said, God, we got to send these people away. He said, it's late. They all have to find places to sleep, and they need to find food. And Jesus said, feed them. We've got a little bit of fish and a little bit of bread. Jesus said, okay, we'll bring it here, and I'll ask the Lord's blessing. Well, I guess Jesus could bless it. He could bless it. We asked the Lord's blessing on it, but he blessed it. And they had 12 baskets left over. Yet another miracle. Now, when Jesus went away, he had gone up to the mountain to pray and to spend time. And he can see the boat roughly a mile from shore. It says because the wind and the waves were really giving it a struggle for him at trying to get across. So he began to walk out there. Now his disciples, these chosen 12 men of God, were freaking out because they thought it was a ghost. Peter, yeah, John, do you see that? That's a ghost, man. I'm freaking out. Oh, great. Now I'm freaking out too. So then there's what, 15 people on the boat? Maybe the disciples were piloting the boat also. So here's a dozen of them, and they were all freaking out. It's a ghost. Great men of God were freaking out about a ghost. Because really, who walks on the water, especially in winter waves? No one and no one. So to say that they were unsettled, yes. To actually make fun of them, you know what, I can't in good conscience. Because to armchair quarterback this or to look at it after the fact, we can easily see their faults, seeing their splinter versus the beam. So he tells them, hey guys, settle down, it's just me. And that's paraphrased to today's language. Actually, what he told them was, have courage. Suck it up, boys. It's the Lord. You know, the guy you spent the last few years with. Didn't you recognize me? Wearing the same clothes I did as soon as we left. Was he frustrated? Quite possibly. Frustration is a human trait. He can be frustrated without sinning. Mm-hmm. And Peter says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you and I will. So Peter being the, I won't say rash, I'll say spontaneous. God says, come. So, out he goes, man. Man overboard. And he begins to walk. See, because of the wind and the waves, did he climb? Because he's walking on water and it wasn't flat. So was he hiking and then, kind of going downhill? And I'm not trying to make light of the situation, but let's look at this realistically. If it was a glass smooth pond, Peter's faith would have had no trouble. Right? Mm-hmm. Now, well, maybe it's a possibility. You get out there and you see a fish swim under your feet. We don't know how big the waves were, but we know that they were big and there was a fierce wind. So, I don't know if you've ever been on a lake during a storm, but it's kind of an event, especially in a small craft. It's really an event in a small craft. So they've got the wind and the waves, and you've got the spray and the howling and the waves. Depending on what kind of storm, the waves can be coming at you kind of from every direction, which is how a boat gets swamped because you can't turn into the waves. So Peter goes out a ways. I'm pretty sure it was more than a few steps. I believe he got to about halfway because now he's looking back and he's going, oh man, I've made it. Oh wow, I got a ways to go. So he's not walking on an even surface, and you've got the wind and the waves and the spray and the harshness of all this, and the reality of what he is doing sets in, and his faith falters. And he said, Lord, help me. And immediately Jesus reached down his hand and grabbed him. So, I don't know if you've ever thought about the time it takes to stand at the surface of the water and to wind up being in the water. Probably not any time at all. It would kind of be like having the tablecloth pulled out from under you, so to speak. You're going down. But he faltered and said, Lord, help me. And immediately Jesus was there. Whatever the distance was, it's never too far. But he looked to the Lord and he said, Lord, help me. I think think he said, Lord, help me for several reasons. Lord, help me because my faith is faltering, but Lord, help me because I might drown. You have to remember the clothing they wore of that day was made of not space-age polyester. It was made of cotton and wool. You add water to it, it's very heavy. Now, because they were cloaks and tunics, sure, you could kick your feet, but when all of a sudden you've got an extra 30, 40 pounds of water weight on you from your clothing, that might make it a wee bit difficult. So he says, Lord, help me. And immediately, Jesus reached his hand. Now, notice that Peter didn't say, yeah, nah, that's it. I'm headed back to the boat. He looked to God. He looked to Jesus Christ, and he said, Lord, help me. And no matter what that distance, Jesus was immediately there to reach down and pluck him out of the water. It does not say that Jesus dove into the water to save him. Peter did not drag Jesus down into his own situation, okay? We do not drag Jesus Christ down into our mess. Jesus Christ pulled him back up out of the water. You know, where he was standing, out of the water, feet touching the water, but that's all. When we look to God to save us, God does not come down into the middle of our situation and help us from there. He doesn't throw one of those little floaty things on and tow us to safety. He reaches down and takes us out of the situation. Or he holds us in the middle of it, because sometimes there is no way to get out of the situation we're in without having to learn something. Sometimes we go through the stuff we go through because there is something to be learned, and other times we go through the stuff simply because we live in an imperfect world. Somebody says, you believe in Jesus? Yeah. Well, how come there's so much pain and suffering? What about the poor? How come he doesn't help the poor? Well, what have you done to help the poor? What do you mean? It's not my job. Well, whose job is it if it's not yours? It's not just Jesus' job, it's everybody's job. See, we can't blame all the bad on Jesus, and we can't blame all the good on Jesus. There are some things that happen because the world. Now, I say blame all the good on Jesus. We can thank God for everything that happens. And indeed we should, whether it's good or bad. Now, Numbers, chapter 21, verses 8 and 9. I'm going to back up just a little bit. When the children of Israel had gone and they had scouted the promised land, and they got all these guys, and they're looking, and they're going, man, look at the size, look at that fruit, and oh my gosh, did you see the size of that cheesecake? That thing is huge. One slice of that will be enough for a day. So, most of them came back and said, there's giants. We can't take that over. And Joshua and his friends said, hey, we got God on our side. Giant schmiants. Now, one of the things they did back was they brought back some grapes. And they had to have 2 men haul this bunch of grapes that they brought back. Okay? Just to show how plentiful that the land was. It's a land of milk and honey, which in that time were 2 precious things, because milk doesn't last very long, and honey's kind of tough to get out unless you're a bear. So, they, in their doubt and in their lack of faith in God, said, we're going to wait. And then they begin to blame Moses for their own sin and their own doubt and their own lack of faith that put them in this position anyways. So they're wandering around in the desert, and they said, Moses, come on, man. So we're wandering around. We don't have any real food. We get this stuff from heaven, and it's old, and it's the same, and it stinks. And they were complaining, Moses, it's your fault. It's yours and God's fault. So God allowed poisonous snakes to come into their camp. Let's remember that the children of Israel were not 40 or 50 people. Okay? They estimate them to be about 1 million. So it's a fair group of people. And many people were being bitten by these snakes and died. And finally, they came to Moses and they said, Moses, we realize that we've sinned against God. Now that, 500,000 people are dead. We finally figured it out. We have sinned. And please talk to God on our behalf and tell him we're sorry. So Moses went before the Lord and he said, God, your people, they realize that they've messed up and they're sorry. Now this was about, we're going to say right at 1407 BC, which means 1407 years before Christ was born. So when you look at before Jesus was born, the time actually goes backwards. So the next year would be 1406, 1405, 1404, until you get to Jesus Christ's birth. That's how we now count it. So you have to think that the time goes backwards as far as counting the years unto the date of Jesus' birth. So, Numbers 21, 8 and 9. Then the Lord said to Moses, make a snake image and mount it on a pole. When anyone who is bitten looks at it, he will recover. And verse 9. So Moses made a bronze snake and mounted it on a pole. Whenever someone was bitten and he looked at the bronze snake, he recovered. Okay? Year 1407 BC. Year 725 BC. Almost 700 years ago. To put that into perspective, 700 years ago, Columbus had not even been born. It was before the Middle Ages, before the knights and the kings. There was no such thing as electricity. Lamps were not lamps as we know them. Architecture was pretty non-existent. So 700 years from the time Moses made this snake, people could look at it, put it on a pole. They got bitten, they could look at the snake. So obviously it was mounted high enough that no matter where you were in the camp, if you got bitten, you could look at that and you would recover. You would live. 2 Kings chapter 18, verses 1 through 4. In the 3rd year of Israel's king Hosea, son of Elah, Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, became king of Judah. He was 25 years old when he became king and reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abi, daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in the Lord's sight, just as his ancestor David had done. He removed the high places, which is places that they would fake altars, if you will, because this is the time where they still offered sacrifices to Jesus or to God. He removed the high places, shattered the sacred pillars, and cut down Asherah poles. And they used these poles as forms of worship to idols. He broke into pieces the bronze snake that Moses made. Almost 700 years after Moses made it, they kept it. Why? The Israelites burned incense to it up to that time. They worshiped the snake that got them out of the trouble from the own problems that they made in the first place. So, part of the moral of this is don't let the thing that helps you out of a situation become God. If God uses an instrument, a person, to get you out of a situation, that person can hold a very special place in your heart for being the instrument. But that person was not responsible for getting you out of that situation. There's I call her a young lady, she's about my age, who I hold very near and dear to my heart. And a few years ago, she went through a really, really difficult time. And she was having a terrible time with forgiveness. She still had so much anger over what had happened to her. She lives, about 4,000 or 5,000 miles away. I didn't know it was time for intermission, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
She lives about 4,000 or 5,000 miles away, so she's not a neighbor.
Just a preview.
But the Lord gave me words to give to her to help her.